Hello, everyone. Welcome. To let some people come in. Welcome to the session. Thanks for joining us this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. Um, Today, we're going to be talking specifically about how Searchable uses Searchable to drive our own AI search. And so it's an insight into how you can use the tool every single day to drive outcomes for your own business, to drive outcomes for AI search, to drive your visibility. Um, Obviously, importantly, it's worth mentioning that we have, although we provide an AI search tool, we have the exact same challenge that all of you have with your competitors, which is we have competitors. They've been around for much longer than us. And we have to compete with them for the same mind share of our potential customers. And often we're coming from a position of our website's like 10 months old, our business has been live for like 9 months or something. And so, there are companies like SEMrush who have been out there for 18, 19 years or something. And so we have the same exact dynamics going on in our own business as you have with your businesses. And we wanted to give you a bit of an insight as to how we think about that. So I'm going to share some slides and like really get into the presentation today. Any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A. Yeah, let's get into it. So share this. Everyone see my screen? All good. Amazing. Okay. So uh like I said before, the to start at the very basic, um, a company like ours is trying to be found by other enterprises. We want businesses to find our business. That is like the key. We want, companies who want to drive their own search, companies who want to drive their own performance to come across Searchable when they're looking for a tool. And so, like I said, we have an uphill battle against our competitors to show up for the key terms that matter the most, the prompts that matter the most, and um, the ways that we go about that differ enormously tactically across lots of different surfaces. And so we want to get into a little bit more about the framework and the thinking that you can apply yourself to driving amazing outcomes for your business. And so the AEO loop that we run ourselves. So the question really behind today is how do you ensure that the tools that you care about, or I suppose it's when AI recommends a tool in your category, a business in your category, why does it name other brands and not your own brand? That's the same problem that we obviously help people solve. It's the same problem that we struggle with ourselves. And JP is going to run through the full system of how to use Searchable, how we use it, how we think about the models, how we think about the technical foundation, what we can build off the back of it, actions that different parts of the marketing team can take, like what we can earn through content, and then how we measure it working. And we'll be live within Searchable today, within a Searchable account today, so you can see like the actual clicking around and how to think about it. And I think an interesting point is I work with a lot of our like enterprise customers, so like big global brands, and they have different teams. And I work with a lot of agencies that work with global brands. And often the insight we're giving is this is going to be very useful for your digital PR team, or this is going to be very useful for your social team, or this is going to be useful for your own website team. And so the insights do vary enormously in what we can advise people, and then they vary very much by the model as well. So the goal stays the same, like improve visibility and keep moving in the right direction, like keep attracting and keep pushing for more visibility for your business on the things that matter the most. Um, it really depends a lot in AEO which models you think that your customers live on. And this is something that we spend a lot of time on at Searchable, is advising our customers on which models matter most to them. how they can therefore show up in those models. A lot of the, B2B, a lot of the B2B marketing and search consultancy work that we do with our agencies is about the fact that their customers should be tracking on Claude. And despite the cost, it is really valuable for their business to be appearing for those key prompts within Claude. And so that's exactly what we're going to show you today. We're going to show you how to use the system. And so I'm going to hand over to JP and I will spotlight JP. Going to hand over to JP, who can walk us through exactly how we do it for ourselves and exactly how you can do it for yourselves.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you again. If you've been on a couple of these, you will know me, know my face, know my voice. And yeah, super excited to take you through today so that we can take you through our system. I'm going to have to rejoin. I'm just having some technical issues. So sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second.
I can entertain people in your absence. Let's see. So JP's left. Sorry, everyone. I don't think I've ever had this happen on a webinar before. But in the meantime, hopefully, one of the things that I think has been really valuable in the last few weeks is actually showing our customers specifically the difference in sources for the different models, and also knowing the different sources is one thing. It's then about establishing like which companies, which competitors are coming up first and because of which sources. And so it informs such a huge part of our strategy here. Oh, is JP back?
I'm back. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I just had a bit of a technical glitch mine, but it's all good. Let me jump in and present, and we should be all good. Amazing. Cool. 1 second. Okay, should be able to see my screen. I'm going to jump into this over here. Can I just get a confirm that you guys can see Searchable?
Yes, sir.
Amazing. Thank you. Awesome. So yeah, as Chris was saying, and as I was saying, if you've been here before, you've seen my face, heard my voice. I lead SEO and AEO at Searchable, and just got a new computer, and it's being a bit tricky, but we're back. So as we've been through this journey, it's been really interesting, and it's not my first time sort of creating a brand in a category that's almost non-existent. That is always a challenge, but it has been the first time doing it in a space like AI and AEO where it's moving so fast. And so I think what we're going to show you today and what I'm super excited about is basically taking you through, effectively the playbook of how we've done it. And so if you look at our system that we have, and I'll sort of dwell on this very quickly, we've managed to make incredible progress as we move through the space. So we are actually in the top 0.25% of all sources in the AI search space, out of like 4,000 sources. And this is really incredibly exciting to see. So enterprise, we do incredibly well. FinTech, we do really well. And for our pricing, we do incredibly well as we obviously sell more prompts at a better price, and we're far more thorough in the tracking that we do. And so this is an area that we've managed to excel in. And this will come into play, it's not a flex, as we move into the part of the presentation that truly matters. Now, one thing that's going to be a massive takeaway from this webinar is that AEO, despite the complexity that people speak about and the chatter that's happening in the space, whether it's on LinkedIn or how you choose to learn about AEO, it's actually a simple, repeatable system that you can learn. And one way that you can do this is really understanding what is owned versus what is earned. And this is a principle that applies to every single brand that you will find. And so when it comes to Searchable, we are about 40% owned and 60% earned. And what that means is An owned opportunity is something that is a piece of content that lives on our website or a website of our competitor, a piece of content that we can create that effectively is something that we can rank for ourselves if we created it. And owned is also consisting of the content that's on your website. It consists of technical foundations and also on-page changes that you can effectively make. Earned is all the sources that effectively you don't have control over on your own website. So it's editorial, social, institutional, forums, and reviews. And we all know those, editorial being large publications that you can publish on, social being LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever the case may be. And when you look at that 40 to 60% split, that 60% can then be further broken down. And that is super, super important in terms of what that means. And it's always shifting and it's always changing. And so this is something that we'll explore as we go on. And so a big part of getting this right is going to the Searchable platform and effectively setting up everything from the get-go. Now, I know you're talking about a lot of product features, but these are super important because if you don't get these right, you aren't going to be able to get the most value from the platform. So if you hop into Searchable and you effectively hop into the knowledge base over here, or should I say the settings and the connectors, if you come over here, this is where you get a chance to basically set up your Google Analytics, your Google Search Console. And we need this because if you don't have this, it's going to not bring in all the data of the platform that you can. So the reason why that's super important is because if you come over here to prompts, when you bring in your Google Search Console, it's going to allow us to take that information as your own first-party data, utilize that data, and then effectively create that to make better prompts. And if you come over to site health over here, and you basically have your visitors connected downwards, this is where we basically start seeing and deriving the most value. And so for me, as an SEO professional, you really want to audit and focus on the pages that are getting the most visitors to your website, because ultimately that's where the most eyeballs will see. It'll be the most digital surfaces. And so you want to start by fixing that. And so when we look at fixing that, if ultimately you want to get all of your data set up correctly. And then you can obviously get your crawler data set up over here, which is where you go to your LLM Analytics. And then you want to get this set up over here. Now, these are going to be all your data sources where we basically see all the crawl logs, and we have all the human visitors and then the AI referrals that come later. So this is incredibly, incredibly important. From there, it's a very simple system. So whether you're looking at your own versus your earned, you're going to find a gap. You're going to determine whether it's owned versus earned. You're then going to put together a strategy to act on that gap, and then effectively going to measure that, and then you're going to repeat that system. Now, I actually got a couple of groups loaded up so I could take you all through everything here, because I really wanted to show you how we use the platform and how it really applies. And so another part that's super important is opportunities. Now, you can go through the platform, you can attempt to look at all the metrics, look at all the tables, aim and discover, what it is that you're going to try to use a platform for. But if you are coming into the opportunities tab, you're going to get a queue and a list of everything that's going to be presented to you. So if I come over here, I know exactly where we're missing visibility. I know where we have sentiment issues, where there's topic gaps, competitor gaps, etc. And this is going to be incredibly huge for basically building a queue of things that we can start looking at. So if you truly want to start building a repeatable system, that's effectively how we do it. Now, I've shown how we do it on the left-hand side. We have to have the data sources connected. So you basically have your GSC and your GA4. Open up your site health. Order it by visitors descending downwards. So coming over here to your site health, basically looking at the pages that are the most important. And this will come up later as we can see effectively what is the most important over here. We order them by traffic, the impact that that's going to have on the business. And once you are in that section over there, you can start looking at the pages that are being affected. And you can start finding real large number of issues that are effectively affecting those pages. And if that's a template level issue, you can go ahead and fix that. And then you can rerun the audit. So what we need to do is look here and really break it down to its first principles, using logic, understanding whether most people are coming onto the websites, not really guessing and sort of poking around in the dark. In the past, with more traditional SEO tools, we've had like Screaming Frog, types of crawlers, which were helpful, but it was really boiling the ocean because we would effectively get, a whole audit back. But here we're able to actually just target those high value pages because we have all the data sources connected. We can then fix the root causes and we can rerun that and we can effectively start finding the problem. So this is going to be incredibly, incredibly helpful. When it comes to focusing on our own content, we want to really reverse engineer the process so we can try and see what it is exactly that we need to publish. And so it's actually pretty simple. And I have showed this before. So if you come over here to AEO Insights, basically come to topics over here, you can come to unbranded and you can effectively come to all topics over here. And if you scroll down, you can see where we basically start seeing some issues where we effectively have topics where we're weak. And so this is something where we truly want to start focus and looking to make content. And so if you come over here, I chose one for today, which is AEO for e-commerce brands. And I wanted to effectively look at, targeting an e-commerce segment, and I want to know that we can make content here. So I know that in the topics that we're looking at in unbranded, we are struggling and need work in the AEO for e-commerce section. So this is going to be a section where we effectively want to do better. So if I look over here and if I basically go to best AEO tips for e-commerce brands and I open up this over here, I can now start seeing what is effectively being used for this particular prompt. We can see that we have all the citation sources. And now we know that in order to rank for this particular prompt, we know that we need to start focusing on, for instance, this article over here, which is being used as a citation source, and I can open it up. And this is where it starts to get super interesting. Now, if we go back and we look at our sources and we break that down into our own versus our earned, we truly want to understand what is the place that this will matter in our AEO strategy. So we know that this is being created. We know that it's basically being created by Ben Salomon over here. And so it's super easy that if I just basically come over here and I come look for this person on LinkedIn, they'll basically, we can find them, we can reach out to them. And I will say that this particular opportunity will be on the harder end. So when you're focusing on editorial and you're trying to get featured on a website like Yotpo, that is effectively going to be quite difficult because you're going to have to reach out to this person, build a relationship with this person, and ultimately it's going to be a longer term strategy and opportunity to try and get this placement. But as we can see that if I really wanted to do quite well for this in terms of e-commerce brands, this is something that I would need to pursue. And so when we look at that, this is how we start to basically do it. And you can go ahead and you can rinse, repeat this for the entire, section that you're working on. Now, one thing I did want to show is, I've lost my screen here. If I come back to our visibility and I look at a particular topic, so if I wanted to come to all topics over here, and I went to e-commerce, I went to AEO for e-commerce brands, and I saw that SEMrush was quite high. So if I simulate SEMrush and I come over here to our sources, this is another way that I can determine what are the sources on SEMrush's website that I need to be creating on my website that is getting cited, or sourced and cited and mentioned by LLMs for this particular topic. And so that is super, super helpful. So one way you can do that is you can come over here and you can hit the drop down and you can hit simulate, or you can go to visibility and you can basically hit that over there, which means that this will come up over here. And now you basically have a full list. You can reverse engineer this. I like to call this treasure mapping, which is something that we've done in SEO for ages, whether it's link building or content or finding gaps, whatever the case may be. Now you have a list of all the pages that you can create that effectively are going to, be content that you can just simply make to go target this section. So this, of course, is really going to get you quite far. When it comes to this particular content and how we choose to create this, there's a number of ways that we're going ahead and we're looking to do this. And so I thought the best way to do this by example would basically be to come to our own pages that are doing quite well. So if I came over here into Searchable and I basically went to blog, I could see over here that we have a number that are doing quite well. And so if I order these by citations and I go high to low, we can see that AI visibility is doing very, very well. Basically drop this down to 90 days as well. And we can see that it's getting thousands and thousands of citations. So if we open this page up, we can see that this page over here has been written in a certain way. And this is the breakdown and the strategy that we basically follow as a business. And so this over here is the main topic. The way that I've chosen to set these articles up for our audience is that I always focus on revenue first. So I always try to write it in a way that I convey to the reader what is the point of this topic in relation to revenue of their business. Why would you want to focus on AI visibility tracking? What is the revenue opportunity? What is the market share? How much value is this basically going to add to the business in commercial terms? But ultimately, if we come over here and we say how to track brand visibility, this is the main section of the article, so to speak, in terms of its intent. And we all know that when it comes to structuring content, you always need to focus on answer first for AEO. So if you basically come back to this over here, we're going to say, to track your brand in AI search, there are a few ways to turn data into revenue protection. And we say, one is to start with prompts that buyers use, etc. So in the first 120 to 180 words, we are effectively going to build that out. And this is where we start with the answer first. If you go through that article, you see that we use a lot of tables. We have very contained sections that focus on particular themes and sub-themes. We have evidence. It's very specific. And so if you go through that, you'll see that we have lots of tables. All of these are crawlable in terms of HTML and the structure that they put together. And effectively packaging in such a way that's digestible and that there's a clear narrative throughout the entire article. And if you look at the article and how it's performing, of course, it is a very relevant topic. So AI visibility is incredibly relevant. But of course, it's also a reason why it's being crawled by these types of crawlers and being picked up by AI, which is why it has so many citations. And if you also look at the articles that are ordered by AI referrals, you'll see that those over here and the ones that get the most referrals are ones that are also incredibly well structured. They're easy to understand, and they're also technically sound. So super important that we do focus this. Now, once we have a topic, we effectively can really just use the tools that exist inside Searchable. So earlier, when I came into our agent, I basically was coming into our own versus earned, and I was looking at a number of ways that we could create topic. Now, I'm also going to come into my Claude over here. And I want to go into the main chat that I had open because this was a large chat that I had built for this particular talk. Now, I was focusing on AEO for e-commerce, and this was one that I was particularly interested in, was the AEO audit guide or an AEO audit guide for e-commerce. So I will show you how I started this chat. Now, I'll leave this section particularly on the screen, and I want you all to look at this prompt that's here, and I'll just give a moment so that you can screenshot this prompt or take it in or write it down or whatever you want to do. But what effectively this prompt does, and we will cover this in the next webinar, is creating a workflow that is comprised of skills and using the agent and is repeatable. So if you haven't signed up for webinar 3, it'll be all about creating a workflow and how to create repeatable skills and automating that. And we're going to be doing that next week. If you look at the sort of cadence of this chat and the flow, what it does is then has broken down the owned versus earned split. And so it's literally told me what it is the owned section that I need to focus on, and what's the earned section that I need to focus on. I've asked it to show me where the topics are that are weakest. And so when we were in the platform, if you came over here and you had basically gone into topics and broken everything down, you would see that we were weakest. But if you come into this over here, you can also do this through the MCP that we have activated in Claude. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that when we are using Searchable for our own strategy, and particularly myself, I'm using a lot of Claude code when I'm basically in terminal and I'm using it over there. But I understand that this is probably easier to follow for more people, that are more comfortable using the web UI or using the app. And so you can ask it to highlight topics where you're weakest. You can ask it to focus who's winning and where with what. And then you can also ask it to dive into those topics and to pull out the content that you can create. So whether it's the top 5 pieces of content that you need to refresh or the top 5 pieces of content that you need to create. And once you do this, you go ahead and you can effectively make this. So I'll basically go over here. I will copy this topic over here. And I will come straight to our content editor and come over here and effectively put it in, plan it, and then I will just hit go. And it's really as simple as that. So using a combination of our agent, which you can actually access a chat like this within our agent or using it within the external MCP, you can effectively just get that going over there. And so when we come over here and we say, how are we doing it? That is literally how we're doing it. Going and finding the opportunity, coming into the content editor, creating a brief, coming to the content editor app itself, producing that brief, running through it, working through the agent over here and effectively getting it going. Then we pass it to a human review. Now, I highly emphasize that you do this. Please do this. The things are getting stricter in terms of AEO and AI search. So it's always good to have a human in the loop, whether it's a writer, an editor, someone who's part of your team. I do not recommend publishing lots of AI content at scale without passing it through a proper process. And having worked in SEO for as many years as I have, it always needs that human eye. And for anything you're doing with AI, it should do as well. So once that's finished, we publish it and then we remeasure it and effectively start to track it. And so when we work through that workflow of finding topics, exposing the topics, whether you're going through the UI and then finding them, and then finding the weak prompts, as I showed you for the AI e-commerce, or if you're doing it through the MCP and Claude, that's how you can find those opportunities. And if you haven't yet connected the MCP, just like we advise connecting the GSC and the GA4, please connect the agent crawler and the MCP. That way you will be able to get the most out of your data. You'll be able to automate a lot of workflows. And when you're inside Claude, you can just ask it questions conversationally. And we've completely wired it up in such a way that it'll allow you to get to a strategy much faster, as opposed to you sort of digging around and sort of looking for these opportunities, which I advise doing that so that you can learn the platform better, but then put in terms of the strategy together as soon as it becomes repeatable, like we'll show you next week on the webinar. Super important that we have a repeatable workflow. So when it comes to searchable strategy, in terms of owned versus earned, so owned is our own technical foundation, the content that we can create, and then you have your earned side. Now, earned will always be shifting. And as sort of Chris had shown with that diagram in the beginning, is we've just seen a massive drop in Reddit in terms of citations. And so the strategy here is not to focus on particular platforms because they're part of like a larger conversation and people saying you need to do this and getting attached to those things. What you truly need to understand is the earned versus earned split. And when you understand that the earned split is then broken down into different pillars and areas, you can start addressing those in their own individual need states, okay? And so this is why I wanted to highlight this Yotpo example over here, is because Yotpo will, fall into like an editorial gap. So we know that editorial makes up 76% of, our strategy. And if you come over here into Claude, you can literally ask it these things, okay? And so if you do look at it over here and you get more into ask about the owned versus earned and you ask it to break down the splits for you, you will know where to focus your energy. And so what we know is for instance, the part of our AEO that comes from social platforms is going to be around 11%. And so when we break it out into terms of resources, we should really be focusing about 11% of our efforts there. But one thing to also know about socials, whether it's YouTube or LinkedIn, because we are B2B, you're going to get more leverage there because it's easier for us to post on LinkedIn posts and Pulse, which will then get us more visibility, as opposed to chasing a 6 to 12-month editorial process in terms of getting published on a blog like Yotpo. And I find that this is a really good way to break it down and to split it out. When it came to SEO, we typically had a couple of metrics that we looked at. And as SEOs, you always knew behind the curtain that they weren't exactly the greatest source of truth. So if you had, for instance, like domain rating, a lot of people spoke about it as a way to focus on the best things. And so when we're talking about digital PR or backlinks, yes, domain rating was a metric we could use. But when it comes to AO, we have different ways of looking at things. And so when it comes to usage, one of the best ways to do it is actually just go ahead and reverse engineer and try and understand exactly what it is that these AIs are looking at. So if you come over here to your sources and you come over here to the sources section right over here, and you look at group and you group by domain, you can now see what AI is choosing to focus on. So we know, for instance, that the Reddit domain is being used a significant amount when we have these toggles included up here, all topics selected, etc. And so when you go ahead and you break it down this way, you start to reverse engineer and know where to apply your focus. And so what you're doing is you're just using a platform like Searchable as a map or as a compass to reinforce a repeatable system that you can follow and execute almost consistently. So you're going to know which section is owned versus earned. You know how to go and find that by basically speaking to the agent, connecting to the MCP, working out what the split is. You know how to go find the content where either you can create it or your competitors can create it, and then AI will then cite that. And so that's the owned section basically taken care of, as well as having good foundations, SEO foundations that we've always spoken about. And as a side note, your SEO foundations and technical foundations for your website should always be top tier. And then when you look at the earn split, then you basically know effectively where you can start looking. And so the question is not how authoritative is something, how many backlinks does something have, which is a lot of old questions we used to ask in SEO, but it's more how often does AI actually use it? And that's what's super important. And so if you go into the sources and you start reverse engineering them, you can effectively see that. And then, of course, the behavior of how AI works with that. And so this is also, fairly simple. So when you basically come to finding a source and a domain that works, for instance, LinkedIn, that is fairly simple for us to do. So I'm going to close this over here. And now we have LinkedIn. So if I basically come over here and I put LinkedIn in, it will basically start to filter. And now we can see what types of articles we should be creating. And so if you see that we have the top cited article is Pulse, so 2 Pulse articles, and then we have a post over there by the one and only Chris. So what this is going to start to tell you is to basically say, okay, well, if I know that LinkedIn is the 4th most used platform and is part of my social strategy, then I need to know, now I break it down into a tactic. What sort of tactic should I be using on that website? Okay, well, I should create X amount of Pulse articles and I should create X amount of post articles. And that in itself is also very easy to do. So if you come over here, and I think I did do this as well. So if you come over here and you look at the LinkedIn posts to write today, I basically said, give me a list of all the top LinkedIn posts that I could make today. Give me the top 10. I see that the ones on posts and Pulse URLs are doing quite well. And it once again confirmed that hypothesis that I had. We know that Pulse is doing quite well, which are the long form articles, and we know the short posts are doing quite well in terms of the sources. And it basically found those from the sources that we have. And it gave me a list of the ones that I can create. And it's literally going to tell you. So if you connect Searchable up to the MCP and you use something like Claude, you're literally getting the answer delivered right here, into your space from our own data. And so it'll tell you create a Pulse article that is with this post, and you can go ahead and do it over here. And if you come into the platform, and if you weren't aware of this, but I just will show you, is that even over here, you can come over here, you can plan and optimize, and you can go ahead and you can create this as a LinkedIn article too. And so when you know effectively what area you need to be focusing on per platform, you will be able to do that too. And I will just reiterate this over here. If I come to something like YouTube, you can see that we have all of these over here. They're used a particular amount of times, and I could recreate this and say, okay, so thanks for that. Wanted to move on to YouTube next. Can you tell me what sources are being used as URLs and what videos I can make? And in doing so, you can then move and rinse and repeat onto different systems. And so if you come over here, and a new way that I would basically do it is I would say my owned and my earned, and I would write that down. And I would say, like, I know my owned is going to be about 40%. I know that my earned is going to be about 60%. I come over here and I'll basically copy my LinkedIn. So I'll basically go over here. I'll copy all of these, copy that over there, put it in here. Let's do that. And now we have our LinkedIn strategy taken care of. That is the repeated part of the system. Now I move on to YouTube. Now I move on to Reddit. Now I move on to all these different types of platforms. And what I'm doing is I'm taking all these little building blocks and I'm stacking them on top of each other. And I'm now creating this entire strategy that contributes and builds back up to those numbers. And so if I know X amount is from social, X amount is from editorial, X amount is from forums, whatever the case may be, I break those down into little blocks. I find where I should be winning. I find out what the effort is there. I put them back together, and that's how we build the strategy as we basically move towards this. This is an example of that on a large enough time scale. So you can go ahead and you can take the citations that you have for editorial. Like for instance, Yotpo was one of those over here. You can figure out what they are. So you can do whether it's big blogs, competitors obviously are difficult to get featured on. You want to go for news publications, industry publications. Like for instance, one of a big source for us for our industry is Search Engine Journal or Search Engine Land, and so getting featured there, of course, is a significant opportunity for us. And so what you do is, and it's very simple, and the reason I'm literally showing you a brand new spreadsheet is I want to literally emphasize how easy it is and how often we overcomplicate these things. We are so lucky to have AI, and in the last 2.5 to 3 years, we've used it to achieve so much. But I, remember a time before that when I used to work in an agency and I used to spend all my time in spreadsheets. And I think we need to always remember that going back to those basics and literally just having a checklist of things that you go through and follow through with literally is one of the most actionable steps that you can take to effectively create that. And so, yeah, that's a huge one for me. So when you get into that, just find your source, work out the pathway that you have, the usage of that over here. So literally you can see the usage over here, the growth of those sources. Another interesting one that I can show is our gap analysis. So if you say show gap analysis, this will effectively show you all of the sources that AI and LLMs are using that Searchable is not being cited in. And so this shows us where our competitors are being cited, but we aren't being cited. And this, of course, is incredibly valuable for us. Now, of course, there are some competitors here like SE Ranking. And as you can see, there's a lot of listicles that are being featured. Maybe there's a few of you on the call that are having a little chuckle because we know that listicles is a very commonly used strategy that a lot of people are saying that we should use. I can't say that I ever truly push this as a long-term strategy, just because I know that eventually it's just one of those things that can be gamed. But what this allows us to do is to show us where our competitors are winning and where they're being used as sources in terms of citations and mentions. And by having that gap analysis, we effectively can start to target these and build a list from these. And once again, if you want to use these in a more actionable way, you can go into the MCP, or you can come over here into the agent and you can start having a chat. If you aren't comfortable setting up the MCP, it's effectively pretty much the same in many ways. And so, yeah, you can just basically start having these conversations, asking what's the top sources you can get featured on, etc., which would be a massive addition to the strategy. Amazing. So this is one of the important ones that I wanted to highlight in terms of breaking everything down. So I'll do a bit of a recap because I think this is important. So we've made the split. We've determined the strategy. It's bifurcated. So we basically have our own strategy of our own media content that we can create. We can look at getting our technical foundation right, which is if you connect up all the data sources that we spoke about, order everything by visitors, get most important pages, audit those pages, and you'll find all the issues that you need to take care of. You can then move on to using the skill or the prompt that I use within the MCP or within the agent, start to find the own versus own split. You can go to the topics, you can find areas where you need to refresh content and areas where you basically need to create new content, and that is that part taken care of. Now, in terms of how you structure this internally, it is going to be a lot of work. I've sort of worked out through sort of internal testing and experiments that your SEO pretty much accounts for maybe around 30%, if not less, of your overall AEO presence, which means that basically on the other side of that, that 70% is going to be going all towards earned. And so AEO is so much larger than SEO. It requires so much more moving parts, a lot more complexity. And so when it comes to allocating this, you basically go onto your earned side. Once you've gone ahead and you've taken care of that, to basically fix everything, we have broken it all down. We found the gaps. We've gone by individual platforms. We've found exactly the types of content that we need to create, LinkedIn being an example. You can rinse, repeat this when it comes to YouTube, when it comes to Reddit, any of the basically big sources that are being used, and effectively breaking it down. Now that we've done all of this, we effectively need to come and understand how is this working for us? And this is the most important part. The biggest part of a strategy is knowing that it's working, measuring it, and then reiterating it and understand if we're going to repeat it or if we're going to adjust it so that we can then make changes in the future. And so that's one of the reasons why we really talk about connecting our LLM analytics. And LLM analytics is huge because what we're going to be focusing on here is our pages report. And so this is, and I mean, just shout out to our brilliant engineering team who have put this together. This is truly one of my favorite parts of the platform because there's, and I see a lot of people posting about this now, and I'm sort of probably smiling now because I just find it quite funny how I sort of have always felt this way from the beginning. If SEO was about ranking in Google so we could get impressions that then would send a click and a user to our website, LLMs and AI have always been about getting that website crawled by machines and bots to synthesize that information for us so then we could make a choice on that information. We've effectively delegated our thinking to machines. And so the biggest part of knowing whether the AI strategy is ever really working is actually starting at the top of the funnel. It's starting at the top of the cascade. And that's effectively going to be understanding whether it's being crawled, whether it's being cited. And so if I come over here to our AI citations, we can effectively start seeing what's working and what's not working. Now, there are a lot of pages that are working for our website. We obviously have our events, which is our AI Search Accelerator. Shout out to the AI Search Accelerator, which I will just actually say, you're going to learn to do all of this and more. So we can really only cover this so much in a 60-minute session. But that is going to be super, super helpful. And if you've been on one of those, you know. And then we obviously have a lot of our content that we can create. Once again, going back to our owned media example. And so if I come over here and I basically look at our blog, we can see what's driving a lot of citations, what's going to be at the top of the funnel for our citations. So if I go back over 90 days, and I have showed you this before, we have our AI visibility tracking. We have our Geo versus SEO versus AEO, a very powerful guide that we put together. And we know that if something gets high citations at the beginning of the funnel, that ultimately it's going to result in people coming to our website. Now, the goal isn't always necessarily AI referrals. It's not the same assumption that we have with sort of SEO and traditional search, in the sense that we're not trying to get X number of people to our website. We're trying to drive traffic, but most importantly, we're trying to drive brand awareness, and we're trying to drive co-occurrence with a particular category. And so when it comes to attribution, understanding how this works, if you have a large number of AI citations, you will ultimately get a significant amount of AI referrals. Now, if I come over here and I do this high to low, and I am going to spend a bit of time on this because I feel like this is the money maker, right? This is, if you've been doing search, you've been doing SEO for a while, you know all that part. You know how to find gaps. You know what content you should be creating. I mean, we've been doing it literally for years. And then you, of course, have the other part, which some people might consider social media, etc. But now we know all these other platforms and sources are super important to our AO strategy. But a big part of what we're trying to figure out, and a lot of questions that we have with brands and agencies on the daily, is how is this affecting our business and how is this affecting our bottom line? And so what we need to really determine is, of all these methods that I've effectively taken you through of how Searchable uses Searchable, is this resulting in measurable metrics that we can actually report back on for the business? And so if you come over here and you look at our best grok tracking tools, it is resulting in one of the highest amounts of AI referrals. Side note on that is that AI visibility as a whole will drive a significant amount of visitors, but it's always niche terms, and I would mark this down for your strategy, is it's always niche terms that are going to have the highest conversion rate, because that is someone that is looking for a particular thing. And this has been and always will be true for digital commerce, is that as that niche terms will have higher click-through rates and conversion rates. It's just part of the discovery funnel. And so when you look at these over here, like best grok tracking tools or Perplexity or Copilot, they literally get the most amount of AI referrals. Now, everything that I've created up until this point and explained to you literally through this entire webinar, when we find these gaps, best grok tracking tools, etc., I found these gaps through the exact same methods that I've spoken about. And what you can see is that the way that I created them in the content editor is literally driving the most amount of traffic to our website in terms of AI referrals. And so this is literally in action. And why, one of the reasons we put this webinar together is how we use Searchable, is that it's actually having a real effect for our business. Obviously, there's a number of ones over here. Like if you look at best AEO tools, it may have a low amount of citations. One, it's a very new piece of content. Once again, discovered with the exact same method that I just showed you. So if you actually go to Claude and I showed you our chats over there, it will show you that that's one of the topics that we should have created. Very recently have created that. So it's getting a low amount of citations, but it is giving a significantly high amount of human viewers. So the point I'm trying to make here is that once we've gone ahead and we've created this entire strategy, this repeatable system, you want to go ahead and get your data sources set up. You want to split it, owned versus earned. And once you then know what to do in each of those various sections, you're going to go down, you're going to break it down, and then you can start understanding what you need to create. Now, if you also go ahead and look at our visibility for these particular sections, it is also particularly high. And that's how we're seeing the funnel and the cascade of basically moving from high visibility topics all the way resulting in AI referrals and real visitors to the website, and of course, signups in these particular sections. Now, because this is an analytics section, you can spend a lot of time in here. I pretty much get the most value from this table because it's a compass that shows me that the strategy is working. As you can see, there's obviously quite a lot of green here, which is very positive. So we're seeing that it is working, it is going in the same pace. As we said at the beginning of the call, we've been very fortunate to literally be in the top quarter of the top 1% of all the sources that we basically track in this platform, showing that, the system does work, we are doing something right, and effectively it can also do the same for you. When it comes to all of these AI crawlers over here, yes, these are important. I would argue that this over here, pages, is the most important for you. Visitors is going to be one of the most important pages as well. And when it comes to Searchable Analytics, you can literally include your Google Analytics 4 over here, your Google Search Console, and your Bing Webmaster Tools. We bring in all of this data into the platform. We use this to make very important decisions to inform topics. So every time that you're going into the agent and you're asking it questions and you're asking it to build these strategies for you, those strategies will only be better if you connect your data sources that are proprietary to your business. You will only create a better strategy if you give the AI and the agent more context. And so that's why we always recommend hooking them up, because it will literally become your moat. If we had to give Searchable to 100 people and 10 of those people connected up their own data sources, they would likely have a lot more impactful strategy because that agent has more context about their business. When you speak to the agent and you ask it about first-party data, topics where you can win, how that's impacting your revenue, your GA4 events, it can pull all that data in and it can reference that. And that is also true for the MCP. And so that's effectively why we highly, highly advise doing it that way. I'm just trying to think if there's anything left for me to cover. Pretty much a recap of that. So you can run it tonight. I've spent a lot of time talking about this. I've tried to keep it as high level and granular as I can and just building that thread. You can start by asking the AI engine a question using a prompt like I've done. And once again, I will show you that. So I showed you the Claude one, but I also ran it within the agent. So I did owned versus earned. I'll go up to here and show you exactly what I used. I'll leave that on the screen. But literally, I looked at it and I said, look at this. Let me zoom in a bit. So look at the sources for this project using all the sources that our engines read, split them into two groups, owned versus earned, by looking at all the content that we could create or competitors creating versus earned, everything that's coming from another domain. So you could literally start with that today. I hope you screenshotted that. And I'm sure we can provide it later. The agent will come through. It'll break it down. You can just ask it, what is the final split? It'll tell you, this is the split that you need to focus on. And then you can start diving into it more. You can look at the brands they could recommend. You can ask the topics where it's weak. You can ask for the sources behind the answer. Once you have split your own versus your earned, you can effectively start looking at the individual sources you need to look at. I think you will spend more time in the earned. That makes sense, seeing as it's contributing more to your strategy, roughly 60%. So you're going to spend a lot more focus there. Separate those so you know what to look at. You can get in your MCP, you can speak to Claude, you can get as fancy as you want with it. Maybe you're a power user of Claude, you've got all your sources hooked up, you've got Excel, you're bringing things from your MCP, you're building a whole bunch of things, or maybe you're keeping it very simple. I've kept it very simple because I just wanted to show you that just having a simple spreadsheet and building a checklist of things you can go after is literally putting one step in front of the other and basically helping you get to that goal faster. Pick one missing page from a topic where you're weak, create some owned content, or find a source that you need to work on, whether it's LinkedIn. Like, for instance, I showed you the LinkedIn example where we basically came to our sources, went down to LinkedIn, opened it up, looked at all the URLs that came from LinkedIn, and then you can basically see well, that's not going to work. Basically see the posts and the pulse articles that effectively show you exactly where you need to focus. You look at what needs to be done. You can put that into the content agent or the content editor. You can act on it, and then you publish it, whether it's earned content. You can analyze it through the LLM Analytics. You can see how many times it's being cited, crawled, how many human visitors are coming from it. You're going to know if your strategy is working or if it's not working. And that, in a nutshell, is the simplest way to build a repeatable system using Searchable.
Thank you very much, sir.
And I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can put myself back on the screen. Yeah, so I always think, I probably didn't say at the beginning of this webinar, but questions, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll always come to them at the end when we do the Q&A. It's not that we're ignoring you. We love answering questions, but that's what the Q&A is for. And the Q&A on our webinars is always at the end. I'm just going to share for about 60 seconds longer on the AI Search Accelerator for a second to give you a little bit of context as to what it is, why we do it, and how it works every single day. And so when we launched Searchable, one of the main challenges I think that we saw in the market was there were all these like AI visibility-esque tools that were truly misunderstanding a lot of the principled strategy that SEO people like ourselves have been implementing for the last 10 to 15 years. And so one of the major ones we came across when we started Searchable was that obviously we won a lot of customers from other platforms like Profound and Peak and so forth, and they came over and we looked at the prompts they were tracking, and we just went, "What on earth is this?" They're so synthetic and they were so non-directional to what the business actually needed to look at. And so for us, we immediately thought the opportunity for us was actually training our brands and our agencies to get better at AI search so that we could all share in the same technical understanding of SEO and AEO. And we've tried to just generally take ourselves out of this bizarre argument that goes on between SEO and AEO and just try and teach people from the experiments we're doing what is working right now to drive AI search. And so the Search Accelerator is exactly as it sounds like. It is us trying to teach you in an accelerated fashion everything we know about AI search. So it's 5 weeks live with the team and myself, where we will be showing you everything that we know about AI. And the the program breaks down into two quite distinct tracks. Okay, so we have a Search Accelerator for agencies and we have a Search Accelerator for brands. And so with brands, most of the time we're working on them, working with them directly, training them, consulting them, helping them understand what tactics they can take themselves to drive outcomes. And obviously JP just went through like in quite specific, I'd say quite basic, but quite specific how you can optimize your AI search. That's what we're doing every single week. We're going through workflows. We're talking about how you can drive outcomes, whether it's your own site, whether it's earned media, whether you have a massive opportunity within LinkedIn as a source, who knows? And then how to create the system that allows you to create a high quantity of high quality content. Because again, we have competitors out there that maybe are slightly more principled than JP and myself, who will just be like, yeah, create 400 AI generated articles. And it's like, we've been in SEO for so long that we know that AI is going to have to, in time, seek a greater authority on the content and seek a better quality of the content to be able to rank it. And so over time, spammy techniques will stop working. Over time, spam content will stop ranking. And so it's really important that people take this seriously and learn the lessons that we've all learned from SEO over the last however many years it's been. So like I say, if you're an agency and you want to go ahead, then you have to, this is specifically for searchable customers, and I know there's loads of searchable customers on the call. If you have a Searchable account for agency and you have a scale account, then you can join the cohort, and we will work with you on the agency side on AI search, of course, but we'll also talk about positioning, strategy, pitching, like how to take the product to market, how to think about it, how to consult your customers. One of the things I think is really important is authentically being very truthful with your customers, that to come up with a good prompt set, you need to spend real time thinking about it. You need to consider lots of different sources of information to create that. And that, if you get right from step one and day one, you can have a much, much better and more valuable, higher revenue potentially relationship with that customer if you are able to track the right stuff. And then from a brand, and then from a implementation perspective, I suppose, the cohort is live, trained by the coaches and myself. We are all SEO, AEO experts. There are on-demand modules within the cohort as well. There's private workspaces, there's networking. It is a really I would take the word accelerator quite literally. We are going to try and teach you everything we know in that short period of time. And I know there's people who have been in the cohort before on the chat. It's quite intense. There's a lot of information, and we will try and guide you towards driving outcomes for your businesses. The cohort kicks off on the 22nd of September. You have to apply, and if you are a searchable customer, we will look at the application and then accept people in. We try and have the highest quality people possible within the accelerators, because ultimately that is what drives the best overall experience for people within the business. So if you want to apply, definitely apply. JP and myself will be thrilled to work with you, with the rest of the team. And now let's take a couple of questions. So Ben asked about what prompts we use. We can send that out in the email afterwards, so you have the exacts, so you have the data, and you can have the recording as well, so you can watch JP do it again in slow-mo. We have a question from Jacob, who I think asked us a few times about do we store the GA4 and GSC data? Yes, we use it very specifically for a couple of workflows. One would be, you're never going to find better data to create your prompts than through your own GSC information. And so I don't personally understand how organizations create distinct and commercial prompts without using GSC. Now, if companies are ever worried about that, obviously don't connect it, would be step one. Don't connect it if you're worried about it. But if you want to do it manually, either our team can do it for you manually off platform, or we can show you the process that we go through, which uses both clickstream data and GSC data to simulate and create the right prompts for your business. But obviously, if you're concerned, don't connect it. But it is the exact same as any Google connection effectively. And we use that information very specifically within the platform to aid SEO and AEO outcomes. A few more questions about what prompts that we use. We'll make sure that those are sent out in the email follow-up to make sure that you have the specific words. Now, JP is like an absolute expert in this space. Like, I honestly think he's like genius level. But I would say that today we gave you the top line of what is possible. The top line. Like, we spend our entire lives doing this for customers. We're probably pretty lazy at doing it for ourselves, to be honest with you. And there's a lot more we could be doing, but you should experiment. The true heart of an SEO person is experimentation. So you should be trying your own prompts, trying it out, seeing if you can affect change. Chris Grimsey asked a question, but then it was answered live. Good to see. Hi, Chris. How do we have human visitors as attributed traffic? That comes directly from GA, so we can map that. The one thing I would also say on attribution, which I can't remember if JP touched on himself, but most of the brands that we're working with are seeing a sort of 1 to 3% AI traffic on their websites. However, the customers who have done post-purchase surveys of their customers and asked where they originally found the products and services, it's like 20 to 25% of people. And so I think at the moment we have an attribution problem within AI, and you're not clearly being able to see the impact that AI is having on your business from a discovery point of view. So I would make sure that you're aware that it's not the case that that your customers are discovering you at 1 to 2%. You're being discovered at a much higher rate, but the exact attribution isn't there at the moment. Rochelle says, what is a recommended timeline, weeks and months for reviewing data in Searchable after making changes to your content? To Tolu, I didn't understand your question at all. So if you could try and rewrite it as clearly as possible, I will answer it immediately. But if I don't understand the question, it's super hard for me to answer it. What is the recommended timeline? So interestingly, with AI and AEO in general, is that you are able to achieve success, movement, and momentum much faster than we were ever able to do it in SEO. And so I can't give you an exact timeline, but what I can say is that if you pick like an unbranded prompt, for example, or an unbranded cluster of prompts around a specific product or a product type, and you see that the sources are off-site sources, then for you, you can look at putting that strategy together and then measuring it, and you'll get an indication quite quickly of how easy you are, how you're able, say, later, Jacob, how easy it is for you to make those changes. Um, are there any plans to introduce a commercial suite in Searchable? What is the logic for creating prompts to track? I'm not sure what a commercial suite is, but yes, the logic is, I mentioned it earlier, but our tool is the only tool in the space that does this, which is probably why the business is growing so fast, is we use a combination of different parts of different data streams to create the prompts. And so we use the taxonomy of your own website for the prioritization of prompts. And we use the data from your GSC for the prioritization of prompts again. So, like, what prompt should you be tracking? You shouldn't track your whole universe, but you should at least understand that there are 50,000 possible prompts that lead to your business, and then you should prioritize them. We use GSC for like a proxy for how much commercial intent there are on keywords. And then we use clickstream data to verify that. And so clickstream is the idea of having plugins on millions of people's websites, and it shows exact keystrokes and how much an indication of prompt volume. Now, Profound in the space talk about having exact prompt volume, and it's been debunked as a complete nonsense the entire way through. It is a good indicator of like it's like a verifier of intent behind certain prompts, but it's not exact. I mean, it's sort of a complete nonsense. So by commercial suite, I meant product level competitor discovery and prompt tracking. Well, I mean, in the tool right now, you can see two types of competitors. One is the one that you select as your direct competitors, and our tool suggests some to you. But there's also the second type of competitor, which is what we are calling the SERP competitor, which is just search engine results competitor. So other people who are competing for the same terms that you yourself do not necessarily denote as a competitor. And so that gives you an indication of other businesses that are vying for the same traffic. And so it identifies exactly who the competitors are for you on your prompts exactly. Ladies and gents, I know we went 7 minutes over. Delightful to see you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to JP for laying it down as always. I hope it was valuable, and I hope to see many of you on the Search Accelerator. Take it easy, everyone.